from SCM Rush, and I just want to welcome everyone back to the Advanced SEO Summit. I hope you guys enjoyed Marina's session, but now we're here with Michael King. So Michael is a founder and he's a managing director at an agency called iPullRank. He's a performance marketer and he's consulted for brands like American Express, SanDisk, General Mills. And so I went through Michael's bio, and there's one really unique thing about Michael. So not only does he know the entire marketing stack, SEO, PPC, social media, email marketing, but he has a background in technical SEO. He also has a background in client-side development, the presentation layer, back-end development, so PHP. So he's the perfect guest to come on and let you guys know why it's really important to have an understanding of JavaScript and, more importantly, how it's going to affect SEO. So I'm really excited to have Michael come on, and I hope you guys are excited as well. So without any further delay, before I bring Michael on, I just want to let everyone know that I'm going through the questions as Michael is doing his presentation. I'm logging them, and I'm going to ask them at the end. So if you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat box. And at the end, I'm just going to fire away. And Michael said before we started that he could answer anything. So give us all your questions. And so without further delay, let's go. Mike, are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready. Let's go. Let's do it.
Cool. Paul, thanks so much for such an amazing introduction. And also, I mirror the sentiment that's been shared in the chat. Your hair is amazing. Okay, so let's get into this. Let's talk about this Technical SEO Renaissance. I've got a lot of slides. We're going to keep it to 30 minutes, but nevertheless, I would encourage you to grab the slides at this URL. I've also written a blog post about this as well, so check it out. Okay, so let's start with an abridged history of SEO, at least from my perspective as someone who's been doing this for over, 11 years now. So first it was webmasters, and I myself, my first job ever was a webmaster. I worked as a high school intern at Microsoft, and there was no front end development versus back end. It's like you just made websites, right? And so, then came search engines. There was really no way to find websites aside from things that people emailed you, or you just kept clicking links till you found things. And so we had search engines like Alta Vista, Lycos, things like that. So SEO actually grew out of this cross section of the webmasters and information retrieval worlds. There's really a bunch of nerds out there trying to get money. So for a long time, it was about hacks and tricks. And, people would do things like shove the keyword on the page as many as possible and cloaking and things of that nature. But then Google showed up and they changed everything. As we all know, they invented the link graph and things just got far more difficult to do. It was still about hacks and tricks. And, we had things like PageRank sculpting and things of that nature. And it's still about people sharing their tips and tricks over beers at conferences and things like that. So Google started to get even better. They had the Florida update, ruined a lot of people's days and businesses. And then they kept getting better and better with things like Panda. And, people started to really give up on the black hat tactics that work very well. At that point, a lot of SEO started coming from different disciplines. So, some of them might have been content marketers. It could be people from other types of organizations, but they weren't just technical SEOs anymore. So because of that, a lot more of content became more into the focus. So, people started just thinking like, oh, if you have great content, things will be fine, right? And then you had a bunch of people starting to say that you don't need to be technical at all. It's mostly marketers marketing about marketing that say stuff like that. But nevertheless, you have blog posts that say things like that. So as an industry, we finally got on that good content train that Google was trying to get us on for so long. But the reality of it is that the web is more technical than ever before. Lucky for you, I'm here to tell you about this technical SEO renaissance that we're all being dragged into. Also lucky for you, I have an agency, iPullRank. We can help out with any technical issues. So let's start with some of the changes in web technologies. What's actually making this happen? Well, first, JavaScript is obviously not going away. For a long time as SEOs, we were told, or the best practice was just make a version of the page that works without JavaScript And you can do things like progressive enhancement, but those were all just thinking of it as a temporary fix. So with the growth of a lot of these different frameworks like AngularJS, it just continues to grow. It's going to be a bigger issue that you need to account for. And I agree with Sean here. Content is definitely not the king. It's really the consumer, but we'll talk more about that later. So AngularJS is popular in pretty much most verticals. And in fact, since I took this screenshot, these have likely gone up. And it's likely that at some point, no matter what, as an SEO, you're going to run into these frameworks and you need to know how to account for them. React.js, which is Facebook's version of this type of thing, also is growing pretty rapidly as well. These are both two pretty popular front-end technologies that developers continue to jump on. And so the funny thing about React is that React is far more SEO ready than the older version of Angular, which is Google's own framework. So we'll talk more about that later. So fundamentally, view source as a way to review code for websites is dead because of the fact that you're not seeing what we call, the computed DOM. And DOM stands for Document Object Model for those that don't know. So if you look at this page that we're looking at right here in view source, you're going to see that a lot of variables are not filled in. For instance, you see this this rel canonical is the variable is there, but you're not seeing the actual URL. So if you look at the site from the inspect element view, well, then you're going to see that filled in. So there's really no value at this point in looking at the view source version because of the fact that these JavaScript frameworks are so prevalent. Another thing that's really important is HTTP 2. The basics of this is that, rather than needing there to be a request and a response for every resource or every file on the site, the server will ultimately start to push the resources to you as it realizes that you're making these connections. So it's going to speed up page load pretty dramatically. Adoption of HTTP2 is pretty low as of now, but we're starting to see over the last few months a lot more of these sites are beginning to adopt it. You're seeing a lot more providers provide it. So WP Engine being one of them. You're seeing things just get a lot faster due to HTTP2, and that's the key thing to think about. So we also need to think about our SEO tools more critically. When you think about how rankings, for instance, are computed, what does this even mean in 2017? Well, if we're looking at rankings, okay, you're number one on this SERP, great. Where are your rankings? You're not above the fold. What does it really even matter if you're number one? So you're not necessarily speaking to the fact that you're not accounting for what's actually going on in the SERP and how that distracts the user. It's kind of like how this chat box is distracting me right now. So also with rankings, when we're talking about that, well, which device, which OS, and which location does that mean? So me being a New Yorker with both Pixel and an iPhone 6, I'm going to see different results looking at Safari and iPhone 6 versus looking at it in my Pixel. And, so rankings just aren't really a thing as far as the way that we approach them, where we're essentially creating this this situation where we're emulating a user who's looking at the internet for the first time, and the first thing that they do is perform your search. So your rankings that you're tracking are pretty much, BS. So are we measuring for context and actionability, or are we measuring for vanity? And I'm going to say straight out, we're measuring for vanity because we're not looking at how the other features of the SERP are impacting what the user is actually going to do. So of course we want the feature snippet rankings. For those of you that have your own homegrown SEO tools, this is how you would scrape it using that those CSS selectors right there. And also, I want to see what the results are in context of paid. So if we're looking at this query car insurance and I'm number one, I'm actually number 8 on the page. So that is a more actionable understanding of my ranking than just saying I'm number 1 in organic. So what's cloaking in 2017? Well, there's something called the 304 response code. Of course, we all know 301s, 302s, and 404s, and 410s, and things like that. But what 304 means is that if the page has not been modified since you last looked at it, there's no reason to download it again. So Googlebot actually respects this. And because of that, you can get your page indexed and then make changes to your page, return the 304, and then effectively what you're doing is cloaking, because Google is making determinations based on the page that they have indexed rather than what you actually show. So when you think more about this, what is cloaking in this adaptive or responsive era where things can change based on the user's features and behaviors? Also, when you think about things like marketing automation, wherein you may serve different views to different users, again based on their features and behaviors, what truly is cloaking at this point? Well, the answer to that is I don't really know, because I've seen a lot of instances of cloaking that are working very well. In fact, there is a pretty popular site in the lyric space that was doing this version of cloaking for a long time. It was seeing a lot of great results from it. So it's really hard to say what Google considers cloaking at this point. Another thing is that Google accepts directives in the HTTP headers. So you have the xrobots tag HTTP headers, which you can specify no index and things like that. And a lot of SEO tools just don't look for this. You can also specify hreflang in your HTTP header. A lot of SEO tools don't look for that. Same thing for rel canonical. So there's a lot of opportunity for instances wherein you may, or your site or your web developers may have done one of these things, and you've seen pages fall out the index and you don't understand why. So you need to make sure that you're looking for these types of headers. So it's actually a better way from a development perspective to implement these things using HTTP headers rather than putting large blocks of code into the top and the head section of your code itself. So HTTP headers would be the best practice in this case. So the other thing is that Google allows for JavaScript redirects for mobile devices. That is to say, if you have a mobile version of the page that you want the user to go to if they've landed on the desktop version by mistake, you can do the JavaScript redirect and Google will follow that. There's not a single SEO tool that accounts for this. So Chrome DevTools does, though, and this is a tool that's for free. It's built into Chrome. It'll give you all of those HTTP headers that we just talked about, and it's a real easy thing to look for in the Networks tab of the browser. There's also geolocation emulation that's built into Chrome. So it used to be that you could do the near equals parameter on the URL, so you could change the location of your results. And now that that no longer works, you can just actually put in the latitude and longitude of the place that you want to serve your rankings from, and then you can see that. Additionally, Google or Chrome, or excuse me, the different phones have what's called remote debugging, where you can plug the phone into your computer and then control your browsing experience through the browser itself. And I see that Martin K just mentioned that Link Research Tools has some details about JavaScript redirects in the toolbar extension. It's good to know. I'll reach out to Christoph and ask him more about that. So let's talk about crawlability. Now, Google has been crawling headless for some time now. I like to use Pac-Man to explain this. So standard Googlebot is like old school Pac-Man. You add a headless browser to it, and then you get Super Pac-Man. That's Googlebot. And so Adam Audette said something about this a couple years back, so you can always trust him. An ex-Googler actually confirmed it, said that was his primary project for 4 years, from 2006 to 2010. I also wrote about it in 2011. There's a study that Eric Wu has been doing on jscrawlability.com, where he's done a series of tests to see what it is that Google will crawl and index, which is a really good place to start if you haven't seen how well this works. So what does it matter? A lot of people have asked me that since 2011, since I said that. So what I've done is I've actually captured a video of headless Googlebot on a site. What I did was I basically used a tool called Lucky Orange, very similar to Hotjar, which will allow you to record sessions of users. So because I wanted to see what it is that Googlebot actually does. And what they do is they'll actually come to the page, and then they're on the page for basically like a second. So, they are rendering the entire page, but they're not necessarily clicking around the page to see, what types of expandable divs and things of that nature you have on the site. So if you want to try this test out yourself, here's the code. Like, you can take a screenshot if you want. So all I did here is basically see if it's a Googlebot user agent, then I will record this session so I can watch the video later. So what you want to do is really dig into this by looking at your log files, because your log files are giving you a better sense of what Google is actually seeing, what their crawl patterns look like. And, I do it just by indexing all the logs into MySQL and then slicing and dicing as I see fit. But there's any number of tools out there for it. So for instance, Screaming Frog has a log file analyzer, which is great. Also, the Botify team has a great tool for this as well. But as far as what Google provides, the Search Console, crawl stats, I don't even know what to do with this. Like, this just tells me like, oh yeah, they crawled a bunch of stuff at some point in time. So I don't think this is all that valuable at all. So log files actually help you really dig in to understand what's happening. So I had a client who was doing a lot of different things at the same time. They were doing, some paid media, they were doing some commercials, and they weren't sure why they lost so much organic search traffic at one point. And so what I did is I layered all that data, including search volume across that time period, and also the log files, the Googlebot activity from the log files. And that orange line that you see drop dramatically after the Penguin update is Googlebot. And so what you'll see typically with these types of situations where they've been penalized, you'll see a huge uptick in activity and then a huge drop right after it. So log files help you get a more definitive answer as to what happened. The other thing that we believe as SEOs, as to be like an axiom, so to speak, is that the crawl pattern is dictated primarily by the links pointing to the different sections or pages throughout the site. So what we find is that it's actually more dictated by the social shares. When we layer that over these different data points, we're finding that the more social shares of that content, the more likely that that is getting crawled. So going back to the idea of JavaScript crawlability and such, pre-rendering is definitely the best practice. It's the best way to ensure that that things are going to be crawled the way that you would expect. And it can also cause problems though. So we had a client who was using pre-render exclusively on their AngularJS site, and we saw a huge uptick of Googlebot being perceived as a human user, and then as a result, they were being served the standard JavaScript-driven Angular pages. And so also we found that when the cache gets refreshed, sometimes that takes a long time. And so to Google, they consider that to be a 500 error. So whenever this would happen, these pages would fall out of the index entirely and only come back later. And they would regain their spot when Google crawled them again and they return to 200. So also, pre-rendering is just not a requirement here. Google definitely can index and understand these pages. And in fact, we did a test wherein we removed pre-render entirely, and those pages did get indexed. And we saw an increase in organic search on those pages. So Google can definitely understand it. It's just how much of it will they actually do the clicking around to emulate a user to index all of your content. So they've also deprecated that Ajax crawling scheme. So, I can't remember what it's called right now, but I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, there was I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, so they deprecated that, but the bottom line is what they're saying is you shouldn't be pre-rendering just for Google. They're saying that they kind of look at that as cloaking, so to speak. And what you should be doing is doing progressive enhancement. But the thing about pre-render is that it does help speed up crawling. So here's an example of a site that's switched to AngularJS. There's a dropping crawl, and then they started using pre-render, and the crawl stats went up pretty dramatically. So a better idea would be to use a library that doesn't require pre-render, like Meteor or Angular 2 or React.js. But like I said, Google expects progressive enhancement. So this is actually a good idea for other devices that don't necessarily render pages entirely as well. So let's talk about scraping a bit. So most of the tools, most SEO tools are built on a library or similar library to this called curl, which basically is a HTTP request library that just downloads the code for the page. So the same thing that I was just describing when we talked about view source being dead, is that, oh, I remember the word I was trying to say earlier. It's the escape fragment. They got rid of that for the Ajax crawling scheme. But anyway, so with view source being dead, the same time, Brooke is like coding stuff. By the same idea, when you're just downloading the HTML for the page, you're not seeing the full constructed DOM, and as a result, you're not seeing the same thing that Googlebot is seeing. So that's a fundamental flaw for the majority of SEO tools. And if you want to get around this, you'd want to use a library called Phantom.js. Although Phantom.js just recently has been, the guy who maintains it recently said he wasn't going to do it anymore because of the fact that Google Chrome is now headless as well. So Phantom.js can be difficult to implement. Horseman.js is even easier. And you can also do scraping within your own browser. I wrote a blog post about this. Basically, you just drop some jQuery into the Google Chrome console, and you can scrape everything from the site pretty easily. So that allows you to scrape things that were, generally considered to be unscrapable before. So it's always been difficult to scrape Google Trends because it's been completely driven by JavaScript. So as you can see down here, I'm scraping everything you see in these trending queries with about 5 lines of code. So here it is. You can also scrape in the methodology that I just talked about. Relies on scraping one page at a time. So with this plugin, it's called R2JS. It's actually a bookmarklet. You can scrape multiple pages within your browser as well. And there's also another tool called Web Scraper IO, which doesn't require any code. You can just kind of click what you want to scrape, and then it does it. Screaming Frog also has a JavaScript mode, which allows you to view the site same way that Googlebot would as well. And here's some code if you want to turn anything into a headless browser. You can also use Phantom.js, the PHP wrapper, if you don't know Node. So Botify also does JavaScript crawling as well too. So if you want to use like just a tool that'll do all this for you, that's a great option. Okay. So, I see a lot of you talking about the fact that I'm talking about a lot of code and technical things. Let's talk a little bit about content and linking because, you guys just aren't going to let me get away with this, talking about technical SEO and not mentioning that. So Google is looking at entities before they look at, when they're looking to understand a query and things of that nature. And so most SEOs haven't gotten to the point where they've developed an entity strategy. And I would encourage you to check out APIs like Alchemy API, which I believe they are looking to sunset. You could also look at the Google Natural Language Processing API, which will extract the entities from your content so you can then tie it back to your keyword research. And excuse me, topic modeling is actually really important to search engines in general. TF-IDF is one of the methodologies that a lot of people, especially overseas, have seen a lot of value out of. And in fact, I've seen a lot of value out of it as well. And, TF-IDF stands for term frequency, inverse document frequency. And the easiest way I can explain it is that if you have 100 documents that are already ranking and you're a new document that you want to rank, you look for the other keywords in addition to the one that is the target keyword that all those other pages have. So for instance, if you're looking to rank for the keyword soccer and all these other pages also have the keyword cleats and shin guards, well, then they expect your page to also have that. So it's really important that when you're building or you're optimizing your pages, your content, that you're accounting for these co-occurring or co-relevant keywords. So as far as, technical content optimizations, I would definitely say dig into this post that Cyrus Shepard wrote, where he talks about 7 different methodologies for doing better content targeting, and pretty much just implement those and you're going to see a lot more value. And, speaking to TF-IDF, I've definitely seen instances where we've just done that and we haven't built any more links, but, we've popped up in the rankings farther or higher than some of our competitors that really just focused on link building. So this is a new tool that will certainly help with that. And onpage.org also has a TF-IDF tool for this as well. So it's really good in that it will give you an indication of the keywords that they're expecting. And then also it'll help you with writing your copy in a better way. So this is a gentleman named John Mueller. And a lot of Googlers actually have been saying this as of late. They've been saying that 302s pass PageRank. It doesn't matter whether or not you have 302s and 301s. That's just not true. So, this is an example of a client that we worked on where one of the only things they actually let us implement was turning their 302s to 301s. And as you can see there, the rankings jumped pretty dramatically in that time frame. And their traffic, despite seasonality, where it usually goes down like you're seeing in this blue line, actually jumped, about 1.5 million more than it normally does. So, excuse me, no matter what anyone says to you, until we see some true, real data that shows that this is not the case, you always want to have 301s in the place of 302s. But at the same time, we also want to stop saying just do 301 redirects, because there are situations where you could do what you see on the right, where you're just doing a single redirect for each URL. But what happens when you do that is every page has to match, every page that is loaded is then run through all those pattern matches to see whether or not this page should be redirected. So it impacts, the site load time. It's better to have the regex pattern so that then it's less rules for the servers to have to process before loading that page. Internal linking structure, really powerful, really important. Based on what I see across our client base, it's not really something that is focused on enough. And there's a lot of tools that will visualize this. I know that the Portland team has done some stuff like this where they've built internal tools. Also, Search Metrics does a great job of this as well, where they will visualize the flow of link equity throughout the site. But the bottom line is what you need to do is make sure that you are going through the process to build internal links throughout your site to your most important pages, as well as those external links that you focus on too. There's also a gentleman named Paul Shapiro who wrote a post on Search Engine Land where he talked about how to calculate your own internal page rank using R. And this is something that we do as well that is really valuable in determining what are some of the pages that we can shift link equity from so that we can get better rankings. So if you're going to do the thing where you want to update your internal links at scale, if you're using something like WordPress or you're using a CMS that does give you access on the database level, I would encourage you to do this on the database level so that you're not having to go page by page to make these different changes. The final thing I want to say about content is that Google is becoming that presentation layer of the web. I encourage you to help them do it. So definitely jump on schema.org, especially now that it is implementable, if that's a word, using JSON LD. So it used to be very tedious to implement schema.org and that you had to go into the minutia of your code and make these changes. But in this case, you're really just throwing these code blocks at the top. It's really simple to get done. Page speed. So anyone who said this was technical or codey or nerdy before is about to get real. Okay, so Google expects things to get to be really fast. They expect the above the fold content to load within 1 second. So if you see the breakdown here, the DNS lookup takes 200 milliseconds, TCP connection takes 200 milliseconds, keep going until you get to client-side rendering. You literally have 200 milliseconds under your control to make things load. So there's this concept called the critical rendering path, which basically talks about the process that the browser goes through to render a page on the site, or excuse me, in your browser, so that you can see it. But each of these steps can make things slower if you don't do them in the right order. So this is what DevTools helps you understand. If you click the timeline section, it's telling every operation that is impacting your page load. And so what you see up here, this yellow, you're always going to see that the yellow takes the most time, and that yellow is your JavaScript. So what the critical rendering path basically says is that, you know, the order of your code impacts how fast things load. So basically, when a page is loaded, it makes the server connection, it downloads the HTML until it runs, and then it starts to construct the DOM until it runs into CSS, and then it starts to construct the CSS object model until it starts to run into JavaScript. It'll execute all of the JavaScript before it continues to generate the CSS OM, and then it goes back to the DOM. So anytime you run into JavaScript, that's going to slow things down unless you make it asynchronous. So this is what PageSpeed Insights is telling you about. And you know, a lot of people don't like this tool. They may not even understand what it's telling you to do, but essentially it's telling you the different things that you need to account for to optimize your code to make things work better. Also find that external resources tend to be very slow in page load as well. So Chartbeat is always a resource that is always taking, you know, like 3 seconds, as you see here. And so speeding up how fast those external resources load will have a dramatic impact as well. So when we talk about things like accelerated mobile pages, the reason why that exists is because Google is saying, hey, you guys can't code. Why don't you follow this spec so that you can make things faster? And if you dig into this and you also look at the critical path, you know, you're going to see that the same things are on both sides. You're going to see that the critical rendering path best practices are the things that are built into AMP. Another thing to think about is that responsive sites are slow. And this is largely because people aren't using conditional loading here. They're just saying, okay, well, let's have every version of every image load for everybody so that, you know, if they change their orientation or what have you, it'll just work. There are also pre-browsing directives that you can leverage, and I think these are actually really cool. They will allow you to specify things to load before they're needed. So the ones we're going to talk about today are pre-connect, pre-fetch, and pre-render. So with pre-connect, what it does is it you know, does the DNS lookup, initiates the TCP handshake, and then negotiates the TLS tunnel before you need it to do that. And then that way it can shave off, you know, up to, well, it can shave off any number of milliseconds. But in this example, you're seeing half of a second shaved off by doing this. So when should you use that? Well, when you look at the network and the page is loading and you see it looks like this, anything that's in the green, orange, purple, green here, these are all things that can be solved by rel pre-connect. And so the way you specify is just like a rel canonical tag. You just go in rel pre-connect to whatever that domain name is. So then rel pre-render, this one is actually way cooler to me because what it does is it loads whatever that next page is in an invisible tab in the background. And then when the user clicks the link to that page, it loads instantly. Not to be confused with pre-render IO, which we talked about before. Google also uses it in the search. So when you're looking at a branded query like CNN, well, if you see right here, they're pre-rendering CNN because they're pretty sure you're going to click this link. And then when you click it, it shows up instantaneously. So I did a test on this to make sure that it you know, was actually valuable. It does make things faster. And so what I did is I made 2 sets of 3 pages. One where the next page is not pre-rendered, and then another set where everything pre-renders the next page. And so what I did is I sent thousands of headless browser visits at the page so I could, see how it performed. So the pre-rendered pages actually perform way better than the control pages. So what you want to do, because pre-render, it only allows you to specify one URL, you want to leverage the Google Analytics API if you're using GA, so you can figure out which page the user is most likely to click on next. And then you can set that as your pre-render, and then you're going to speed up the page load for people. So here's your code. Get your screenshot, or you can see it in the deck. So when we did it on our site, it improved our site speed 68.35%. Don't use it on mobile because mobile is already slow enough. And if you're using an analytics package that is not Google Analytics, it may show you fake sessions. So what you want to do is defer the load of your analytics or your ads or anything that you don't want to have fake sessions using the page visibility API. There's also rel preload for preloading things within the same page. So let's say you have an image that's buried in some JavaScript. You could preload that image so that it will load instantly once that user gets to that section of the page. All right, so what should you do moving forward? What are the things that you should know to be prepared to account for this technical renaissance, as I've called it? Well, one, you want to understand the document object model. This is the building blocks for how pages are constructed in browsers. You want to understand this critical rendering path, and there's a whole section in the Google developers section of the site that speaks to what it is, why it matters, and how it works. You want to understand what impacts page speed, not only on the coding side, but also on the network side. You want to understand how to do log file analysis, and there's a great tutorial on this on the Built Visible site. You want to understand SEO for JavaScript frameworks. Great article here, again, on Built Visible. There's also an article on the Brigsby site written by Justin Briggs, where he talks about the step-by-step of how to do this. You want to learn DevTools, and this is a blog post that I'd written, 6 things that you should know about DevTools as far as what it can do and how it can help you. And then you want to really dig into accelerated mobile pages. You also want to understand Facebook instant pages, although it seems like AMP is winning over instant pages. You want to read up on HTTP2, how it's going to impact what it is that you're trying to do. And really, we should all just get back to testing things. And I like putting this picture of Rand in his lab coat. Really what always impressed me about SEO in the past was that, it was a lot of these really smart people who came up with these things to test to figure out what it is that Google is doing. And when we all started becoming, these content marketers, so to speak, we've kind of gotten away from that. So if we as an industry get back on this, we're just going to be better at this than we ever been before. So let's get off the content train. Let's get back to making experiences that perform. And because I said Renaissance, I feel like Michelangelo should be in here as well. And that's all I got. Feel free to holler at your boy.
Awesome. All right, Mike. Here's some of the latest comments. Lindsay says, mind equals blown. Martin says, Mike's killing the young guys right now. Sean says, yeah, this presentation is crazy good. Wes says, this is useful. Unweird username says, this is epic. No username says, this is very clever. So let me just get into some of the top questions. And here's one of the questions. So there's a lot of beginners in the chat watching your presentation. So the question is, if you had to ask yourself a question or a question that you wish somebody asked you, what would that question be? And then answer it.
If I had to ask myself a question,
or maybe not.
I guess the question would be
question, but a question that you wish somebody asked you.
Sure. So one, first of all, thanks everybody for giving me such nice feedback. I really appreciate that. As far as I mean, I guess the real question would be like where to start, right? Because I just threw a lot of stuff at you. And I would say if there are three things that we need to really be focused on as SEOs at this point, one, structured data, two, speed, and three, content that speaks to very specific audiences. So as far as where you should start, you know, the thing that's going to give you the most value right away is going to be, really digging into some of these page speed things, because something that you're going to find across every organization is that everyone feels like their site is too slow. So that's going to be a good quick win that you can get, and then you can get more buy-in for everything else that you're trying to do. And, you know, it's going to give you more latitude to do cooler things. And it's also going to help you like ramp up on the things that you don't necessarily know. As far as you know, what you may feel is like daunting and all the things that I've shown you here. So I'd say start with page speed, move on to structured data, and then those very specific content experiences.
Awesome. So here's another interesting question. So somebody has a subdomain, Mike, and they're ranking the subdomain. They're getting traffic to the subdomain, but they want to put all that content on their root domain and they don't know what to do. Is it worth it? What should they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that, you know, every time we've moved something from a subdomain to a subdirectory, it's always been a tremendous impact. And, you know, just make sure you put your 301s in place the right way. Make sure you update your internal linking structure. The other thing is that if you're in a situation where things are on the subdomain for a technical reason that you can't really move it to a subdirectory in an easy way, then look into reverse proxies, because reverse proxies are a way where you essentially make it look like it's in that subdirectory, but basically on the back end, the request to download that page is sent to that other server, and then it's shown on the URL that looks like it's on that site. So subdirectory all the way is way better than subdomains. Every single time we've done it, we've seen an increase in traffic to that content.
Awesome. So sorry, you just broke up just a bit there. I think we caught everything though. Can you hear me? Was everything okay? Okay, so here's another question. We have someone asking, so they have a flat URL structure and they want to change it to a silo structure, and they don't want to lose their rankings. So would you recommend that they change their flat structure, or should they keep it? Right.
I would say keep the flat structure as far as that existing content that's already performing. I would say that if you want to do that moving forward for any content that you make after that, then that's fine, because if you change your structure, the value that you're going to get from that structure change is going to be offset by that incremental loss from that 301 redirect. So 301 redirects are just not ideal, right? So the only way that this can work where you don't lose anything is if you're able to just move everything and there's no external links pointing to those pages, so the 301 redirects aren't losing link equity. So I wouldn't move those existing pages. I would just the rest of the structure, like the rest of the content.
So here's another question.
Out, I would put
so you run an agency, so this is an agency-related question from a fellow entrepreneur. So like if you run a PPC campaign for someone, you can like sort of do a business simulation and you can predict what kind of revenue they're going to receive from that campaign. But when you're doing search engine optimization for a client, how would you show them or prove to them the ROI? Like how would you forecast the ROI to the client?
Right. So what you're saying is, how would I do projections? And I mean, the thing is this, like projections are BS in general. You know, even in paid search, they're not going to be completely accurate. But what we do is we'll build models leveraging search volume versus CTR, but not CTR based on the models that you find on websites and such. Rather, we use the CTR that you get out of Google Search Console for that site. So the model should be essentially, the model should be essentially search volume times CTR times the average order value from organic search. And then as far as like what you can expect over time, because obviously you're not going to get 100% of that right away. You should build some sort of step function based on, you know, how many issues or
awesome. That was a great question, guys. For those asking about the slide deck, he has a slide deck that's going to be available. The recording is going to be available. And so feel free to rewatch it if you didn't catch that. Okay, so here's a question for you. In your content section, you talked about a formula, TF-IDF. Can you re-explain that? There seems to be some confusion about what this formula is. Nobody knows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily exclusive to search. It's more like a statistical thing. And I mean, I don't know if I can explain it better, but basically, you know, it's like if you want to rank for a keyword, it's going to look at the pages that already rank for that keyword and then see what other keywords they have on that page. And then basically determine whether or not you also have those keywords on your page. So it's not necessarily just putting your target keyword on there a bunch of times. Rather, it's
awesome. So here's an interesting question. So you talked about errors on your site, and you went into a lot. Like you went into coding errors. So like your site might not validate to the World Wide Web Consortium, so it doesn't meet coding standards. You might have SEO errors, like duplicate content issues, and etc. So what tool would you recommend, or a set of tools that you would recommend for somebody to do a comprehensive site audit to determine what issues they have and then what issues to fix?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of tools that are good at that. You know, we kind of have a pretty comprehensive tool set. Like we have Botify, we have Search Metrics, we have Screaming Frog. And really, it just comes down to the different nuances of those tools. But any one of those tools work well from my perspective. I mean, there are some that are better than others. And, you know, if you want me to specifically tell you the ones I don't like, feel free to send me an email or hit me up on Twitter. But aside from that, you know, I think that pretty much most of the tools out there that have some sort of auditing thing to it is pretty good. But the ones that I use the most are going to be Search Metrics.
Awesome.
Screaming Frog.
All right, so here's an interesting question. So we have some people here that aren't coders, that aren't developers, they're direct response marketers. They write copy, they create landing pages, they create sales funnels. And so their question is that when starting an SEO, what do you recommend that they learn? You threw out a lot of technologies, client-side technologies, JavaScript, asynchronous JavaScript, Ajax, XHTML, CSS. Like, where should they start? What technologies should they pick up?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think it would be good to learn one backend language. I don't care which one it is. PHP would work because it's very similar to JavaScript in that it's a C-based language. So, you know, you learning the syntax for one, you'll learn it for the other. But yeah, I would say you should definitely think about at least getting exposed to JavaScript. And, you know, just like the basics of how the web works. So, you know, knowing how to make a web page. And I don't expect SEOs to be developers. I just expect them to be exposed to these things enough that they can communicate with developers. So, you know, if you took the courses on Code Academy for how to build a web page and, you know, the intro courses on JavaScript, I think you would have more than enough to really understand
Awesome. So leading to
you know,
that, there's
what
like
you're going to
questions
need in
about if
order
you
to be
could
effective
recommend good
SEO.
courses on technical SEO. Is there anything that really sticks out for you, like a program you could recommend, or a site that you could recommend, or books that you could recommend?
Yeah, like I said, Code Academy is a good example of a site that has a lot of resources like that. There's also Udacity, and Udacity they had a course where you could learn Python, and it teaches you how to build a search engine. I know they have one that's like how to build a social network at this point, but there's a lot of different courses on there, especially they have a course around the critical rendering path by somebody from Google as well. So there's a lot of free resources on that
Awesome.
site
So here's
that are
another
going to be very
question. I
helpful
think you hinted on
for getting up to
the
speed on some of
HTTP
this stuff.
protocol and HTTPS. So right now, there's sort of discussions in the community about whether you should have all your pages be secured. I know common practice is to just secure your checkout pages where there are transactions. What are your thoughts on that? Should people be securing all of their pages with HTTPS?
Yes, so absolutely. So yes, you should definitely be securing all of your pages because of the fact that HTTP2 requires it. And it's not because it requires it in the spec itself. It's just that all the browsers require it in order for HTTP2 to work. So I definitely would encourage doing going secure for all your pages. And also, as Google has said, you give a ranking
Awesome.
boost.
All right. I think you just broke up a little bit back there, but I think everything fine. Let me there's a lot of new questions that came in. A lot of these questions are regarding WordPress. So a lot of the audience uses WordPress. Is there a specific WordPress theme that you recommend people use, or a suite of products or tools or plugins that you recommend that they use to make their lives a little bit easier?
So there's not a theme. Like I would suggest, working with the developer to build a custom theme, because the problem is a lot of the themes that you'll get on like ThemeForest or what have you aren't built with best practices in mind with regard to things like the critical rendering path. So I would say get a good developer and work with them to get a theme built. As far as plugins, I mean, you can't go wrong with Yoast for SEO. Everything else is more, just making the content um, more, accessible or structured or what have you. So, I mean, everything else, it could be like different plugins for caching and stuff like that. It's really about how do we make a good website rather than how do we account for SEO. So I would think more along those lines, but there's plenty of posts. In fact, I think there's a number of posts that Neil has where he talks about, some of the better plugins that you should be using. So I don't know if I have um, any direct recommendations aside from Yoast and some of the schema tools. And also there's a plugin for AMP as well, and those things. But beyond that, I
Awesome.
think
So
it's
I'm going to
pretty
switch
much
it up
just
a
the
little bit,
standard
give you
stuff
like
that
a
you
little
would use for
entrepreneurial question. We have
WordPress.
Herman here. Herman said that he's been following you for a while. He met you at a conference, and then he wants to go off on his own. He wants to start his own agency. And if you have any suggestions for him based on your experience on starting his own agency.
Yeah. One, I would say, just do it. Like when I did it, I just had the feeling I could do a better job myself than the agencies I was working at. And so I just was at a point where I was like, okay, well, I have X amount of dollars in the bank. If I don't sell a single thing, it'll last for like 6 months. So let's see what happens. But definitely thought leadership has been really helpful for me. Just the fact that I write on a lot of blogs and, I speak a lot, that made it really helpful in getting clients. But I will say, as soon as you can, document your processes. Like that's one of the things I've really learned the hard way. And really invest in training your team if you end up building a team. But aside from that, just do
Awesome.
good
Regarding
marketing for
building a
yourself
team, what
and go for it.
specializations would you recommend that somebody has on their team if they're just starting out and building maybe a team of 3 or 4 people?
It depends on the focus of the agency. So if you're doing, an SEO agency, I would say you definitely need an account manager unless that's something you like doing. You need someone who can do content, and you need a developer. So the way that we do it is that everyone has like a baseline skill set in their understanding of SEO and analytics and
Right.
things like that. So you don't necessarily need an
Right.
SEO person because everybody on the team is doing SEO. So that way it really works in helping you conquer a lot of things, and then use
Awesome.
that.
So I'm going to end here with one final
build on
question
top of your
from
agency
Jason.
once it's performing.
And it's a technical question. He wants to know, how does dynamic content insertion affect your SEO? Yeah, Jason, if you can give us a little more context based on just my
I think I need a little
experience, is
more
probably
color on that.
asking about, so for example, like if you have a link and maybe you have like UTM variables in the link, when somebody clicks through on that link, you start inserting the keywords in that link into the page. So, or maybe, does that make sense? So like you have like the word octopus in the link, and so there's a variable in the code that puts in the word octopus, for example, into the content.
Yeah, I get it. So basically, the thing is that if Google never crawls that path, they're never going to see that content, and so it doesn't matter as much unless you're also serving that content to Google in some way. So the thing is this, that if they crawl that path and then there's also a rel canonical on the page, well, that content also won't get indexed. So it all depends on how things are implemented. This is a bigger concern in the marketing automation side of things, because basically what happens is, you could have a situation where the content is shown to Google and also the user, and you could have conflicting things that get indexed. So in that case, again, you want to think about the rel canonical tags and things like that, so you're showing
awesome,
the
Mike.
right thing to Google.
I apologize if I didn't get to all your
questions,
guys, but we hit 5 o'clock. Mike, thank you so much for coming on. People are saying this is like the best presentation that they've seen all day. They love the technical aspect of it. There's no fluff, and it's all action-based. So guys, the deck's available, the recording's going to be available, and maybe, just maybe, Mike is going to be available to answer your questions as well if you reach out. So yeah,
feel free to email me. Hit me on Twitter. I'm at iPullRank. Feel free to reach out. I saw some people complaining about a lag between me and you in the broadcast or whatever. I mean, we're not experiencing that, so I'm hoping that the video recording is better for you. But if at any point anyone has any questions, I'm Mike at iPullRank.com. You can reach out to me at iPullRank.com.
Awesome. And guys, stay tuned, because right now we're going to have Aaron Angus.
So thank you so much.
Angus, I accidentally pronounced his name wrong. He's going to be coming on. He's a managing director at Louder Online. And so if anyone is in the chat, if they want to have enterprise level clients, and so tune into the next presentation, because he's going to show you how you can do just that. So stay tuned, and thank you, everyone. And hold on one second. I also have a message. I apologize for that. Tony. So Tony is next, Vasil. I apologize for that, guys. I gave you the wrong person. Go ahead, Vasil. Vasil, you're there? So guys, I think like Tony Tai is there. He's from SEO. He's an SEO at Expedia Canada, and he's going to come on in just a minute. So stay tuned. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Peace.
Later.